Thank you for hitting play, and welcome to the series we're calling Data Pioneers. We're bringing together the brightest minds in the healthcare industry, supporting the transition to value-based care. We'll be highlighting the best practices, tools, lessons, and advice with a focus on data and analytics. I'm your host, Rich Waller from WellStack, and we're very excited to have you join us today. Well, today we're here with Dr. Patrick Woodard. We're going to do a session today talking about innovation from within the health system and kind of just some best practices, storytelling, with Dr. Woodard today. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's really my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So, by way of background, before we kind of dive into the details, give us a little kind of background on you, your experience within the healthcare industry, maybe a little bit about your current role, and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm currently the Chief Healthcare Information Officer at Monument Health. We're a regional health system based in Western South Dakota, but because of the geography, we care for patients across 5 states. We're the busiest ER in all of South Dakota. We're the place where people who go to the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally get care when they, have a motorcycle incident involving whatever it might involve. And we're really proud to be part of the community. It's been a community health system for its entire history from the early part of the last century, and has really been a pillar of how people see care being delivered within their community. And one of the things that we're really most proud of is keeping people at home or close to home when they might otherwise have to go to Omaha or Denver or Salt Lake or even farther afield. Part of the reason that means so much to me is that I'm a physician by background myself. I'm an internist and I practiced for many years as a hospitalist. And so I've seen, especially at a tertiary center, the kinds of care that needs to come from far away and how difficult it is for patients who are far from home, far from their support systems, and would really benefit from getting care close to home. So I'm really glad that I work for a system that's able to do that. I took a somewhat circuitous route from being a physician to now a CIO, and partly because it's not something that you necessarily plan for when you go to medical school. In fact, when I was a resident and first went to talk to the chief information officer at the residency program where I was working, I had no idea what that was. I knew that I had some software that would help us save patients' lives, but I didn't know anything about healthcare administration. I knew that there was a CEO and a chief medical officer, and they were both scary people, and that's all I knew. So I certainly didn't have on my radar the idea that I would one day be in a similar position. But really what took me from the day-to-day practice of medicine to the day-to-day practice of medicine across a broader range through technology was looking to solve a specific problem. We had a bad patient outcome. We were training on paper, and it was something that could be fixed or resolved by some really simple code that would allow people to not get lost within a system. And over time, it became like a light EMR for skilled nursing facilities and long-term acute care facilities. That was a really rewarding experience, partly because you were able to see directly from a clinician's view how you're caring for literally tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of patients and helping them have better care experiences, but also from just the perspective of understanding and learning all of the complexities that exist within a health system. I think, we look at healthcare, it's a bit of a black box. It's really one of those industries that is so complex, and people know that it's complex but think that it can be solved. And every day I learn something new, and it was really nice for me to kind of have a crash course into how does this work that I think has really been able to help me be more successful in my current role, just understanding both sides of the table, both sides of the coin, and respecting that there is so much complexity in how do we solve real problems for patients and for clinicians.
Absolutely. And when you think back about that journey and kind of that, from the clinical side to the IT side, what's been most surprising to you throughout kind of the whole journey you've been on?
The thing that comes to mind first and foremost really is how little other people think about what I think about all the time. And I don't think it's bad. And in fact, I'm glad that people don't have to think about it. I always kind of liken it to walking into a room and flipping a light switch, in that you don't think about anything that happens except that, in fact, you don't even think about the lights coming on unless they don't. And as an IT leader, as a data and analytics leader, the thing that is something that I have to constantly remind myself is, and my teams, frankly, is that we think about this for 40 hours a week, or more likely 80 or 100 hours a week. And the average person thinks about it never. And to really help, it really helps put into context when you're getting a question or you're seeing frustration from an end user, or from a clinician, a caregiver, or a patient, that it's not because they're mad at you. It's mad because they're trying to solve a real problem. They're trying to help get care for a patient. They're trying to help do something in their own day to day, but they don't know any of the parts that go into what it means to flip the light switch and have the light come on, or push the button on the computer and have the EMR work and pull up the right patient record. So from that perspective, it's really humbling, I think, to just keep that in mind and remember just how we're stewards and custodians of complex systems that no one really needs to know about or wants to know about, but they just need them to work. And so I think it's nice to have that as a constant reminder so that we can talk the right language.
Right. Yeah. And kind of getting into, we talk a lot on this series about data. And when you think about, kind of coming from that clinician perspective, especially delivering data to physicians and clinical stakeholders that maybe have been in that role for, decades or, a long time, what are some of the challenges? I mean, in some of the discussions we've had, you've expressed that there are definitely challenges. How would you kind of unpack that and articulate, ways you've either been successful or some of the challenge you've seen in delivering data to those clinical stakeholders?
I think the first thing to remember is really that physicians in particular, but clinicians overall, really are data driven in terms of the way they think about making decisions. They are pretty hesitant to adopt new technologies or new care modalities until they've seen the data. But seeing the data can change their minds instantaneously. So recognizing that is part of the core of a physician or a clinician, something that they learn very early in medical school and are taught continuously on how to be critical about data, to be skeptical about studies, research studies, how to read them so that you know what methodology was used, and is this a valid methodology to use for the study? Are the statistics the right ones? This is the kind of background that physicians and clinicians are coming to a data request with. So from that perspective, taking those kind of that into context and saying, what is the real question you're trying to ask? And really helping them to frame it in a way in the same language that they use all the time is really core and critical to success in telling that story with data. Ultimately, data aren't used just for data's sake. It's because you're looking to tell a story somehow. You want to convince an administrator why you need to get a new surgical robot. You want to understand what care modalities will best care for a patient who comes in that may be a little bit different than other patients you may have seen, and you want to see what's out there that may have been working on other patients that you might want to try with your patient. And so recognizing that there's a real downstream answer that they're looking for. Maybe they haven't framed the question exactly correctly, or maybe they don't understand what all is possible to help them really to answer that question. So I think really bringing that back and getting to what is the question that we're trying to answer, or what's the reason that you're looking for this, so that we can partner and try to get to what do you really need. And I think it can be really rewarding when you do it that way, because most of the times you'll suss out something that wasn't quite there before, but you'll have an aha moment and you'll really be able to get to an answer that makes everybody feel is a better and more validated answer.
Right. Yeah. We talked to our mutual friend, Joel Vanko, about, and he frames that as, the passionate problem, or, how do you focus on the clinical jobs to be done? And I think there's, it makes a lot of sense when you get to those aha moments and really kind of focus on those elements, and then, leverage data in the platform as kind of the secondary thing that actually enables or solves that job to be done. So that makes a ton of sense.
I would say most of the time that somebody asks for something, I almost never reply with what they're asking for immediately. And I usually ask several questions back to them, simply because it gets to what is the real heart of what you're trying to solve. And it is more rewarding when you get to a more satisfying answer, because we can all be order takers and say, oh, you ordered a burger. Well, you weren't. You ordered a burger because you think we have burgers. Well, we actually have a whole kitchen, but maybe what you were really looking for was a salad. If you just ordered a burger because that's all you knew. And so helping people come to the answer of what is it that they really are looking for is just really more rewarding, and just like professionally, and makes it look better too, frankly.
That's awesome. Well, now, so you've spent 10 years or maybe more as a section violinist for the Reno Philharmonic, right? Tell us a little bit about that, and any thoughts on how your kind of your life and your career in IT has been shaped by music.
Yeah, that was actually what I was supposed to do, or what I thought I was supposed to do before I fell into medicine. I went to the Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore for the first year of college and was really training to be a professional violinist. And it's been something that has been part of my life ever since. It made sense to me when leaving the conservatory to go on a med school track. And I was able to talk myself into it, because you can be a part-time violinist. It's kind of hard to be a part-time doctor. So it was nice for me to be able to say, this is not something I'm giving up. I'm just shifting my focus to a more academic pursuit. I started playing with the Reno Philharmonic actually when I was not yet 16 years old. And it's been something I continue to do today. I still go to Reno where my parents live. I play with them several times a year, so anywhere between 3 and 5 times a year. And it's a place where I'm able to put aside a normal way of thinking and kind of focus on a completely different way of thinking. It's a little bit difficult to describe if you aren't yourself a musician, but if you are, even if you weren't a particularly good one, you know that there's a way that you just have to think that's different. There's a physicality to it, there's an emotionality to it that we don't afford ourselves in our professional lives. And one of the things that I think has resonated most with me, and this is something I've thought about in terms of how music relates, is kind of what we expect when we come to work. When I play with the Reno Phil, we're all professionals. There's anywhere between 50 or 90 musicians on stage on a given concert. And everyone's playing mostly different parts. The violins, I'm a violinist. The violins will have 2 parts, and then you'll play one of them. The violas, they have a different one. There's several flute players, and they'll each have different parts, and the trumpet players will have different parts. And you're expected to be there prepared. And I think that's what is the most interesting to me when relating it to the rest of my life, is we all show up prepared, but we're working and we're playing completely different things, but we're all focused on the same common goal, which is making good music, playing in time and playing in tune, and a level of synchrony that we look for and hopefully achieve. And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting to see in health systems. Sometimes we forget that we're all working towards that same goal, especially when maybe there's independent physicians out there, or we get frustrated. But the reality is we all come prepared. We're all there for a same goal. And if done really well, you end up with this like really harmonious outcome. And I think that's really how I relate the music part to it. I think there's another component which is really difficult to describe, which is just a way of thinking about the world, which is just kind of questioning everything a little bit more, or just recognizing that there are multiple viewpoints for the same really problem that you're looking at, or challenge, or what have you. But that one is really difficult to create some sort of tangible piece of advice or anything. It's just like, it's there. If you know it, it's there. And if you don't know it, you can find it, but it's harder to find.
Yeah. Well, you have to give me the schedule for this year. We're not too far away. I'd love for my family and we'd love to come up and watch the,
Oh yeah,
see
absolutely.
the,
We
see the
actually
film
do.
play.
During COVID, we started doing webcasts, so
Oh yeah.
you don't even have to be there.
There you go. Well, I feel like you need to feel it.
There,
In
it
person,
is better.
though, right?
It is better.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I've heard you say, from time to time that there's no Stack Overflow for culture change, right? So maybe unpack that a little bit, what you mean by that, and then what guidance do you have, for organizations or leaders such as yourself that are looking to change culture or drive culture within their organizations.
I love that concept. Frankly, I coded. I wrote the software that eventually became DocDocs, and it was what got me into health IT. And I wouldn't consider myself like a genius coder. I didn't study computer science. I was just a geeky kid. And like most coders, at some point you come into a question that you can't answer on your own, or you feel like you kind of have written yourself into a corner and you're not really sure how to get out of it. And there's a website called Stack Overflow, which it's kind of like a wiki for coding. And almost all the time, if there's a question that you have or a problem you're trying to solve or a particular output that you're looking for, someone else has not only had that challenge in the past, but very kindly also posted the answer on Stack Overflow. So usually you can just say, I'm trying to figure out this problem with this array, and Google it or search on Stack Overflow, and there will be a host of answers, some right and some wrong, but something that will work for you. And so to be honest with you, I think if you look in the code of most modern software, you're going to find probably copy paste of things from Stack Overflow. I almost guarantee everything is full of it. And it's not because people are plagiarizing, it's just why recreate the wheel if somebody else has already solved it. Now you should also check your code and do good QA.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's out there. And I think as a corollary, how many books on culture change have been written? I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands. And to me, the fact that there are so many should serve as a warning that there's no single answer that's correct. And I think when you look across different organizations, you find that each one of them has similarities. I mean, they're all health systems. I work in health systems. So health systems are all similar in their own way, but they're all different in their own way. Famously, Anna Karenina, the Russian novel, begins with all happy families are the same, but unhappy families are different in their own way. And in health systems are unhappy in their own way. There's something that's a little bit different here, is a little bit different over there. And most of the time it's because it's working for them, and there's a nuance to how you talk with physicians, or a nuance with the way that nursing staff communicates, or a nuance to just how often you need to be physically on site versus you can be remote, a bunch of different things. And I think from that perspective, there's no shortcut. And so having to really listen and learn from the organization about what has been done historically doesn't mean you can't try it again. But if you aren't listening and learning from what came before, you'll find yourself perhaps repeating things that shouldn't have been repeated. So taking that initial first few months, 6 months, and then on a very continual basis, making sure that you have a pulse of the culture of the organization, who your leaders are, who your friends are, who your maybe more annoying folks that you need to spend more time with are, and understanding that to shift culture over time.
That's great. Yeah, a lot to unpack there. I think that by the way, you're the first person to quote Tolstoy on the series. So congratulations. That's a good one. So when we think about technology, I mean, people remark all the time that the healthcare industry is years or even decades behind many other industries in adopting technology and best practices and things. I mean, what would you say to that?
I don't think they're incorrect. I think there absolutely is a lot of fact behind that statement. Whether some things are fine, and other things is like, why? Just like, please let me like drag you into modernity, or at least like the 90s. I mean, what other industry are fax machines still so pervasive? I once met a CMIO who was handing out $100 bounties for any printer that somebody would be able to get rid of, and he had paid out $0. So I think there's just an inborn kind of clinging to this is working, this is working. But I think more importantly, really comes to, I guess, the culture of healthcare, which is data-driven. And I'll come back to this in just a second, but thinking about how long it takes to get the data. And then just the stakes that you have in front of you. Even other industries, which I think healthcare gets compared to a lot, like the airline industry, which does have life and death on the line, those are a little bit more engineering problems that have to do with maintenance or, and there are, behavioral and organizational psychology problems that you need to be able to address there and cultures of safety and those kind of things. But healthcare is so personal because you're literally sitting in front of a person who might be sick and maybe they won't die, but they may not get better. And that's not an outcome you necessarily want to have happen if you tweak something that was working before. So I think there's a bit of nervousness on the part of folks who work in health systems or who work in healthcare to let's be 100% sure that this will have a positive outcome before we scale it. Make sure that we're doing it at scale, which is why I think we do so many pilots in healthcare. And in there, when you look at the way that data becomes available, it's through clinical trials, the gold standard of which is a randomized controls trial. And there's a concept in there of having it be no worse than the current gold standard. So for example, blood thinning medications are all compared against Coumadin, which is actually a very old medication. It's probably from the early 20th century, but it came into common use in the middle part of the 20th century. And nobody actually really studied that one. But we know that it works. So anything that's new has to be at least as good as Coumadin. And I think that type of thinking is pervasive throughout a health system. I think helpfully to say the new thing that we're doing should be at least as good as the thing that we're currently doing. Because it really does come down to there are lives at stake, there are people's health at stake, and you only get one chance at that. So let's make sure that that one chance is at least as good at what we're doing currently.
Mm-hmm. And so you touched briefly on that, on pilots, right? And so when we think about innovation, and I don't know if this is even industry specific, but a lot of innovation happens via pilots and via kind of, being able to take a new technology, run it out in a POC or a pilot. But, I think we've discussed that a lot of times things get stuck in pilot phase too often, right? And so, what have you been successful, or, what kind of ideas do you have about, helping solve that problem and getting things that are, coming into a system via pilots into a production and really start to, affect into a production environment and really start to affect patients or administrative processes and things like that?
There's an old IT joke that the surest way to make sure that something stick around forever is to call it a pilot. And that's true in healthcare, perhaps. Well, I don't want to speak for other industries. It's definitely true in healthcare. I think a lot of the challenge comes with not first identifying, this goes a little bit back to what problem are you trying to solve, identifying what is it that we're really looking for? What's the objective or the outcome that we're hoping to achieve? And identifying it in the beginning and making sure that you have real, specific, measurable outcome metrics that you can say, and a deadline by which you can say, have we achieved this, yes or no? And then make a go, no-go decision. I think a lot of times it goes to intent. People are trying to do something positive. There are very few bad ideas that we see in healthcare. Most of them are positive. They're looking to solve a problem. They're looking to improve patient flow or happiness or any kind of number of good intentioned things that sometimes just don't necessarily have the follow-up of, okay, then what? And so we've taken the approach of any new project, regardless of scale, needs to have defined metrics before it even kicks off, and a time frame at which we'll measure those, with the real intention to say, like, is this something that we'll pull the plug on, and being okay with saying that, which is, a little bit harder sometimes because there's always somebody who likes it, no matter what it is. Yeah. There's always somebody who likes it, and it just depends on how loud that person might be. But making sure those are defined in advance does make it easier for us to be able to say, is this the type of thing that we should scale now? And especially, a lot of things, if you're not measuring it, maybe it's something that could be really saving the health system millions of dollars. Maybe you could be saving dozens of extra lives, but you're not able to take advantage of that opportunity because it's stuck in pilot phase. And so there's an opportunity cost in not moving forward, but you don't know because you're not measuring it. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, making sure that you're being mindful and smart and about those things that will make it a yes or no at the end of the project by taking the time at the beginning, even though it may be frustrating sometimes for both yourself, for the business, sometimes for physicians or caregivers to say, hey, let's be very mindful and planful about this, because the outcome will be better. And I think you'll see over time that people are really happy when the outcome is better, and will be grateful later that we took the time a little bit early to be really mindful about it.
Yeah, and I mean, Dr. Woodard, as a clinician, right, and having a clinician's background, it's pretty unique in terms of becoming an IT executive, an IT leader. What impact do you believe that's had on your career, and then what would you recommend for maybe guys like me that came more from the computer science side of things and didn't have the benefit of that clinician's background? How should we bridge the gap, or really work more effectively in not having that background?
They're two completely different worlds, just to be frank about it. And there are so few good ways to bridge the divide that it really has to come down to being willing to listen and to understand something that you probably don't understand, or at least pretend you do. I have the benefit of having practiced, and so can speak firsthand to the challenges that you see right on the front line, because what you think should happen immediately then goes into the health system administration black box, and maybe 9 months later you get something, or maybe never. And that's incredibly frustrating for people who are trying to do a good job. I truly believe that almost everybody in healthcare comes to work every day to do a good job. And I think the challenge there is that we're, from now on the health admin side of things, you're trying to do a good job for the entire system, recognizing that each individual provider or physician or caregiver doesn't see the whole system. They see a person that's sitting in front of them that might be in pain, that they're trying to help. So I think my advice for folks who are not necessarily clinicians is to try and just think about it from the lens of, if I'm sitting in front of a patient who maybe is unhappy or in pain or getting bad news, what am I thinking about? And really the answer is the patient. There's really not much else that they're thinking about. So how are we able to tell the story? It always comes down to a story. How are we able to tell the story in the terms that a provider who's trying to take good care of people can relate to their job being easier, their ability to care for and emote with a patient better, and really be able to understand kind of what is it we're really doing. And I think that's the best advice I could probably give, short of, if you can find someone who will let you shadow them for a day or a week, do that too. I mean, I very much believe in walking the Gemba, because you'll see things that you thought you knew how they worked and they don't at all. Yeah. So getting out there and really seeing it is also really helpful if you have that opportunity.
Yeah, I remember one of the first times that, having been in the technology side of, the administrative part of the revenue cycle, the first time I actually walked through an office in a call center and watched everything that happens was just mind blowing, right? Because you just see it, and to your point, in shadowing it, you see paper moving all over the place. It's not in the system. Like, what's going on? And even on the clinical side as well, having had the benefit of shadowing a few different types of specialists, it really changes your whole perception about what you're building software for.
Well, and you get you go out on the Gemba and you're just like, why are you doing it that way? We wrote it to do it this way. Well, is it because when we wrote it, we didn't actually talk to anybody? Or is it because they found a way to do it 5 seconds faster, and now we need to account for that when we do our next build, right? So I think those are real world problems. I don't know. You kind of want to be able to tackle all of the different ways that people do things and recognize that maybe this is the ideal way to do it.
Yeah,
But at least, like, I don't know, it's like a car, right? Like, do you really want to have to like go into the software and find the temperature down button, or do you just want to push the button? So, I mean, it's the same, I think, in healthcare. You want to have multiple sanctioned ways to do something as long as it makes sense, but making sure that the safety and stop gaps are in there.
Totally makes sense. When you think about the next year or two, with all the things going on in the industry and technology from an innovation standpoint, what are some things that you're most excited about or most interested in, kind of that are on the horizon?
I think it would be foolish of me not to say anything about generative AI. I will say, I think the most exciting use cases are not what we'll see in the next couple of years. I think on the drug development side, there will be some work. It's still going to have to go through normal drug approval pathways, so we're many years away. I think the true clinical use cases will be hindered somewhat by the tools, just hallucinations and inaccuracies, and the need to be able to deliver findings out of a patient record, for example, that are backed by fact and not by some sort of mystery. So I think those will somewhat limit our ability to see true clinical use cases. But there's so much benefit in healthcare that is just a step away from the patient, kind of that middle office. Things like, and we're doing a pilot of a generative AI tool to write messages back to patients from physicians. So if I ask a question to the doctor, it might be written by AI, and then the doctor will look at it. And part of the idea behind that is doctors are busy. They might give you the right answer, but they'll give it to you in a brief way because they frankly don't have time to write out the longer, nicer version of it. There was a study that was done a couple months back, maybe a year ago now, that looked at patients' responses to answers to their questions that were either written by generative AI or the physician. And almost 100% of the time they preferred the AI version. Not because it was more correct, and in some cases it might have not been correct at all, but it was nice about it, right? And it kind of brought that personality. Right. So what we're actually seeing with our docs who are using it is that they are accepting it most of the time. It's like 90+% of the time. And it's not that they're saving any time necessarily, but they're being much more personable about it. And they're able to give a more human, ironically, answer to the patient. So things like that in that kind of middle office. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think on the rev cycle side of things, where we're really looking at efficiency, I expect there to be a ton of new technology coming out within that 24-month time frame that would enable us to respond to denials of claims in a more timely way, or just the processing and the volume that we would have, the ability to demonstrate that we're actually reviewing charts. So we're looking at a tool now. Well, we're putting in a tool now that will help our hospitalists on the front end of things be able to capture more diagnoses that accurately reflect the acuity of the patient, which downstream can have a positive impact on the people who are in clinical documentation integrity, to be able to say, well, maybe we don't need to review 100% of charts now, or maybe we can review 100% of charts now because they're just more accurate. Things like that I think will have real positive impacts on the efficiency of the health system, which has downstream impacts on the ability for us to get more patients through the door, get patients in sooner and really be able to provide more personal and more human care. So I think those are the types of things that I'm really excited about. And then I think just in general, I know we've been talking about consumerism for many years, and I think it's been one of those things that have been on people's horizons for a long time. But I think the next couple of years will be ones where we start to be able to catch up to the things that the other industries that we see, hotels, hospitality, airlines, will start to be able to catch up to those in terms of just what your experience is in healthcare. And so those are not necessarily terribly sexy to catch up to other industries, but I do think it's, what we expect as patients. And so those are the kind of areas that I'm really excited about over the next 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some of those, the administrative cost burden, right, of our system, it becomes pretty interesting and pretty sexy of a problem to solve when it comes to just like looking at affordability across the industry, right? I mean, so much there's so much administrative waste in the system that I think you're right that some of these initial use cases for AI and some of the generative AI improvements are going to be really exciting. So that's cool.
I think the reality is, in most cases, health systems revenue increases annually are relatively fixed, either by the government or payers that you have a long-term contract with. And so the only real way to bend the cost curve is through efficiency. And that's something that is becoming increasingly challenging, but you have to start squeezing the stone someplace. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity just right on the top of the surface.
Yeah. In terms of what do you see as headwinds right now for CIOs and healthcare leaders in the industry? What are some of the things you're seeing as challenging that you have your eye on for the next year?
Complexity, I think, to pick just a single word, is probably the number one challenge, especially as we get new tools that do have real positive clinical impacts. At my health system, we support around 650 applications, all of which are important. They're not all mission critical, although each individual user does think that theirs is. But we do that with about 180 IT staff. So on average, that means that folks have about 4 applications that they support, which none of my people are average. So that means that some of them are supporting 12 or 20. And what is, I think, an increasing challenge that we'll all need to be able to come to some sort of answer for is, what do I do when the radiologist comes with a new AI tool, for example, that more accurately predicts pneumothorax in patients who just had a procedure, or who more accurately detects lung cancer in patients who smoked 15 years ago? I'm not going to be able to say no to that, and I don't want to. Like, these are the types of innovations that we need to be able to adopt as health systems, but add to a level of complexity that's already almost ungraspable. And so from that perspective, we really do need to be able to figure out a good way forward to say, yes, we want to be able to take advantage of these innovations, but in a way that's sustainable, both from a financial perspective, but also from just a maintenance and care and feeding perspective. I think those are I don't have an answer for it yet. So if you need other guests do, please let me know. And I think it extends to patients as well, right? I have a couple of applications that patients may use at some part of their journey throughout their care experience with us. Maybe they're a new mom, and so there's a mommy app. Maybe they're going through physical therapy and they have a physical therapy application. But how fair is it to patients to ask them to, hey, take these 20 drugs, and by the way, you need to download and use these 12 applications. And yes, we could build our own application as a wrapper around them, but not all of them have APIs that support integration. So that's not really how it's going to work. So I think those kind of layers of complexity are the challenge that I'm not sure that we'll solve, but it's something that certainly it requires constant monitoring. There's a lot of other challenges, cybersecurity and all those kind of things that are out there. But I think just the sheer complexity of things right now is one of those that will be something that doesn't have an obvious answer.
Yeah, that's great. And so we try to, kind of pull together a collective mind share on this series. And so we always ask, where do you go for information? Do you prefer books, podcasts, industry events, Like what, where do you go to find your most relevant information for your role?
I use Gartner a fair amount. Industry conferences, I think, are helpful in terms of talking to colleagues and peers, learning from vendors, always taking it with a bit of a grain of salt, of course. And then honestly, I just lean on peers a lot. Throughout the years, you make connections and folks that have sat in your seat, who maybe have, it's kind of like the Stack Overflow for CIOs, right? Is somebody else's cell phone number.
There you go.
Because somebody else has probably tackled something similar. And at least if they haven't, they might ask you a question that makes you think, hey, what problem are you really trying to solve? How are you thinking about it? What's the real challenge here? And so I think that kind of network of people to cry on their shoulder or lean on is probably the most useful, to be completely honest. But just really those types of events where you're able to step back a little bit out of your day-to-day, if there is such a thing, and be able to think about how you're thinking. And so those are probably the best sources of information.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything else that we want to cover today? Any exciting projects or anything additional we should cover?
I think we hit most of the highlights.
Okay. Well, Dr. Woodard, it's been such a pleasure to have you. It's been great to spend some time, and we really appreciate you being on the series with us.
Yeah, it's truly my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Excellent.